India has gone through in every field. What has heartened me most, that through 12 prime ministers, 11 general elections, insurgencies, assassinations, India has kept the steel in its spine. Faith in its democracy and belief in its constitution intact. It has survived poor leadership, venal politicians, lazy bureaucrats, corrupt entrepreneurs, even an elite often interested only in itself rather than its civic responsibilities. It has overcome many threats to its secular fabric and survived innumerable terrorist attacks. It has embraced the digital revolution with aplomb and risen to become a software giant. It has weathered international turbulence and in the past decade has emerged as a global powerhouse in its own right. There are many lessons I have learned in these 40 years, but there are 5 of them that stand out. Lesson number 1, history has a nasty habit of repeating itself. I see that so many of our covers seem a repeat from the past. Same story, different faces. Politicians elected with huge mandates have a tendency to disappoint those who believe in them. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, voted to power after a sharp left turn in 1971, frittered away her mandate by allowing herself to become a prisoner of conspiracy theories. The Janata Party, which formed the first non-Congress government in India in 1977, collapsed under the weight of too many egos and disintegrated in time for the triumphant return for power of Mrs. Gandhi. In 1984, Rajiv Gandhi obtained an historic and unprecedented mandate on a wave of sympathy and hope, but within 28 months descended into disrepute. The Narendra Modi government, which came with a single-party majority after 25 years, is now somewhat on a slippery slope right now after 22 months in office. This brings me to lesson number 2, which is in some way related to lesson number 1. Most issues in India don't get permanently resolved. They have a karmic life. They never die. Just look at this. The forces unleashed by the demolition of Babri Masjid in Ayodhya after 24 years are still mired in court, while noises for the construction of the Ram Janmabhoomi temple get louder. Victims of the 1984 anti-Sikh riots are still waiting for justice after 32 years. Kashmiri militants are just as angry as they were in 1989, and ASPA is still in force 25 years on. Aspirations of mobility tapped into by the Mandal Commission report, first tabled in 1980, can still bring the capital to a halt, with reservations becoming an even bigger issue. The Maoist militancy that continues to demand the destruction of the state now spans larger tracts of the country than 44 years ago when Charu Majumdar of CPIML died. The Indo-Pakistan dialogue seesaws from bonhomie to battle since the Simla Accord in 1972. The bureaucracy continues to bloat while its reform languishes despite umpteen commissions, beginning with the first Administrative Reform Commission in 1966. The clashes between the judiciary and the government is a continuing saga too. And the world moves on as we are stuck in our unresolved problems. Then there's lesson number 3. Change happens in India not by design, but by default. And it happens quietly. The bigger the change, the lesser the noise. In 1991, the much-touted reforms of Dr. Manmohan Singh, which released us from the Hindu rate of growth, happened because we didn't know where our next lunch was coming from. Our foreign exchange reserves were so abysmally low. And Dr. Manmohan Singh's reforms happened without much political hoopla. Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao never talked about reform. He just let his finance minister quietly dismantle the license Raj. It was reform by stealth. They were much needed reforms, but they were not that fundamental in my opinion. They didn't reduce the size of the bureaucracy or didn't get the government out of the business of doing business. 2 years ago, just when we thought we were cursed with indecisive coalition governments, India voted for a strong leader, giving him a clear mandate to lift the country out of the pathetic morass it had sunk into. However, ushering radical and rapid change in India is a daunting task. In spite of all his hard work, I think Prime Minister Modi is now realizing this. There are too many dissenting voices to listen to, vested interests to please, hidden agendas to pacify, and self-serving bureaucrats to scupper the best-laid plans. Oddly, we couldn't have been living in a more fortuitous times. We're constantly being reminded that India is the sweet spot of the world, and with good reason. The muscular Chinese economy is in a meltdown phase, and several European nations are waiting for a bailout while the refugee crisis mounts on their doorstep. The problem in India is not that our economy is not growing, but the perennial gap between potential and achievement. We are today probably the fastest growing large economy of the world, but we are beset with some very fundamental problems. We still have a lopsided economy where around 50% of our working population is employed in agriculture while contributing only 18% of our GDP. 1/3 of the world's poor still resides in India. Jobs for 10 million youth who enter the job market every month is still scarce. Almost 1/4 of Indians are not literate, and more are what I would call the uneducated educated. In fact, the educated unemployable. 54% of the agriculture is still at the mercy of rains, and the general state of infrastructure in this country is woefully inadequate. These problems, in my opinion, will not be solved by tinkering, but structural reform. Unfortunately, this government is following a different path, I feel, and I quote these fine words from their second economic survey. Very well written, I must say. And the survey says, and I quote, "A persistent, encompassing, and creative incrementalism." Wonderfully put, but I think on the wrong track. I believe to get real reform in this country, we require the ruthlessness of Sardar Patel, the guts of Indira Gandhi, and the vision of Pandit Nehru. Not an easy combination to get. I know many of the leaders from the ruling party you will hear later on in this day will disagree with me very strongly. But ladies and gentlemen, this is what democracy is all about. And that brings me to lesson number 4. We have the greatest gift a nation can give to itself, democracy. You wouldn't think it looking at our noisy parliament these days, but I believe we have a working democracy, however flawed it may be. No matter however poor or illiterate an Indian may be, he gets an opportunity to exercise his wisdom in the ballot box ever so often. We should be proud of that. But there has been some change recently. It has been well described by one of our speakers, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, that our national life has become a tissue of contrived resentments. Lawyers are breaking the law, lawmakers are violent, the lunatic fringe is feeling emboldened to spout their venom, irrelevant debates of identity and nationalism have preoccupied the national agenda. The atmosphere of social anxiety led to a bright young Indian taking his own life, another being jailed for chanting slogans, and a man being lynched for what he stored in his fridge. It would be wise for Prime Minister Modi to take heed to what his dear friend, President Barack Obama, said in his recent State of the Union address, and I quote, "Democracy does require basic bonds of trust between its citizens. It doesn't work if we think that the people who disagree with us are all motivated by malice. It doesn't work if we think our political opponents are unpatriotic or trying to weaken America. Democracy grinds to a halt without a willingness to compromise, or when even basic facts are contested, or when we listen to only those who agree with us." That's the end of the quote. President Obama also said, "It's easier to be cynical and to accept that change is not possible and politics is hopeless. But if we give up now, we forsake a better future." I agree with that. We should all have faith in our democracy and above all, in our people. We are an amazing country with such diverse, talented, and smart people. Our country is bursting with youthful energy, with 65% of the population being below the age of 35. My hope comes from watching ordinary Indians doing extraordinary things all around us. Therefore, lesson number 5, don't look back, always look ahead. India will always surprise you. Our potential is enormous, and sooner or later, it will be in full bloom. So on the 40th anniversary of India Today, I'm delighted to unveil the underlying theme of this conclave, which is the world tomorrow. Also in our 40th year, we've looked ahead and launched a 24/7 news channel called India Today, which embodies the same values of credible, independent journalism without fear or favor to anyone. This is what India Today magazine has stood for the last 40 years. We are now therefore available in print, on air, and online as one brand. We have for you, ladies and gentlemen, an amazing array of speakers from across the globe on a wide range of topics. They've been handpicked for their expertise in areas that will impact the world we will leave for the next generation. As we celebrate our 40th year as a media group and are so much part of the digital revolution, we've asked 5 of the most talented filmmakers in India to make short films for the mobile millennials. The films are about things that touch us most: gender, caste, freedom of speech, sexuality, and faith. We'll be premiering these films at the Conclave before releasing them to the World Wide Web. We also have a new Conclave Cafe where we encourage you to meet our speakers, get your copies of their books signed, or just take a break. Great conversations, fresh ideas, spectacular performances. Ladies and gentlemen, think of it as a boot camp for the mind with some luxuries thrown in. Enjoy the conclave and keep your hopes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Purie. All right, so let's now directly get into our inaugural session for the day.
Incident, a promising young kabaddi player was shot dead on the streets of Rohtak in Haryana. What's truly alarming is that the fatal shooting was caught on camera on Tuesday afternoon. Kabaddi player Sukhwinder Singh,
Tired of living a quiet, happy, boring life, so I decided to get married. And my wife says, welcome to hell, boy. But the episode ain't that bad. It's just about all right, above average.